Okay, so let's talk about the RGB versus alpha, or what I like to call the Despill versus the matte. And these are two different things we create separately, and then we combine them together at the end. The actual Despill is taking the green polluted light, that's the green light that'd be bouncing and hits Jack here on the face, and little areas that are really green, like in this reflective goggles here, and also in between little hairs here. That's how we have to basically get rid of the green, and then over here, this is where we create the matte. So this is all about creating the black and white matte. This is all about creating the actual RGB information. And then finally, we use this as the cookie dough laid out on a cookie sheet, whereas the alpha is sort of like the cookie cutout stencil shape that cuts out the eventual RGB. So these are taken into account separately, and then again, the alpha consists of the core matte and the fringe matte, and then the despill has to do with the core despill and the edge despill. So there is an element where we're going to have to maintain as much as we possibly can the original skin tones. You will not want to tick off the DP or the colorist as a compositor by actually changing the skin tones, because maybe they're meant to be left that way. Sometimes, of course, you will have to color grade the background to the foreground and let the colorist do the stylistic approach. But ultimately, you have to be extremely cautious not to affect the skin tones. I know when we were doing the Capital One commercials, even though Sam Jackson is a relatively dark complexion, we had to be very careful not to fiddle with his skin tones through the whole process. It was more about just being very careful to match him, and being very careful about color grading to get not too goofy, because there's two people you can tick off in the professional world, one of which is your colorist, and the other, of course, is the original cinematographer. And in our case, that was John Schwartzman, who is going to be the DP for Star Wars Episode 9, and these bigwigs you do not want to tick off. So they'll, of course, even in the post-process, actually meet with the colorists and just kind of look at the final image, because ultimately it is their vision. They are the quote-unquote cinematographer, despite the heavy hand of the the colorist, as well as ultimately also us compositors. So just kind of keep that in mind throughout the whole process, that the whole point of doing a core despill is to kind of maintain the core, almost like how we create the core with the alpha. The core is to kind of keep that going, and then the edges, that's where we can have a little bit of play to kind of blend the two together in the background, as far as the back plate, whatever we choose that's going to be behind Jack here in the foreground. So the Despill has its greatest hits. We have expressions. These are really great. This is one of the real popular expressions, where it talks about how if green is greater than the red and blue combined divided by 2, or the average, then take the red and the blue divided by 2. That's your green. It's again, I'm not much of a math guy, but anyway, it does take out the green really effectively in this expression. This is the most popular expressions used. It also maintains the luminance information pretty well throughout the process. Not completely, but it does do a good job. The Keylight is, even though this is a keyer, this can act as an actual despill, and I'm going to go over that. The hue correct is another one that kind of get little spot areas. This is an extremely difficult key, even though it may look very simple with Jack, because we're going to have all types of issues with his beard. We're going to have issues over here. There's all types of stuff, little edge things we're going to have to do with these goggles, and the transparency issues. And then there's Kill Spill. Kill Spill is really, really popular in the industry. This is Pixel Fudger, I think they are. Kill Spill, you can get this off of Nukepedia. You can see there's a suppression, a limiter, a spill tweak, and you can choose either red screen, green screen, or blue screen. Again, really awesome. And then, of course, there's Despill Madness, which will not necessarily work unless you have it plugged in, installed. It's a little bit more complicated. Despill Madness is downloaded off Nukepedia.com. Those are the most popular despill tools that we use in the industry, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to kind of go through all those as we kind of move through this training videos. But I first want to kind of show you guys the actual matte that I created with Jack, or what I decided upon. So obviously I did a denoise, and there is no denoise when you deal with the despill. There's no need to do that. It's just what it is. The whole point of this is we're not worried about the red, green, blue information. We're worried about the alpha that we're going to be building off of the red, green, blue. So I used a Primat. You can see it's pretty clean. If I slam the gamma down, there is no holes in him. And then I went ahead and graded him up a little bit here. So you can see right here, if I take a look, I just crushed the blacks a little bit, brought the gamma down a little bit. Gamma, in a sense, is going to play with the gradient here. It's going to lock down your absolute whites and absolute blacks, but it's going to allow you to kind of, if I put my viewer to it here, kind of adjust the fall off, so you can kind of create somewhat of a feathering effect if you want to pull back a little bit, which is what we're always trying to do with the core. We're trying to pull it back a little bit, because it's going to be that piece of the pie that fills in the Swiss cheese holes of our fringe mat. So then I like to dilate it out just a hair. So if you can see, I just dilate it out just a bit, and that basically, if there's any holes in here, in this case, I might not even need this dilate, because if you kind of crush down, you can see I don't see any holes in here. But just by dilating a little bit, if there was holes in here, you can dilate out. I would never do a dilate more than maybe 1 pixel usually. You know, that's just what it is. And then the filter road, this is where we do the pullback. We have to shrink it in to be on the inside of what is the fringe mat. So if I go ahead and take a look at it, you can see, you know, this, we're losing this area right here, and then we blur it a little bit. So you can see here's the blur. This is at 19. Again, I could probably go a little bit less than that and just kind of blur it out a little bit, you know. So what's important to note, if again we come over to our fringe mat, I went ahead, I didn't use the daisy chain version of the IBK color because I found this actually gave me a pretty good result. So the IBK color, you can see it's extremely eroded, right? I had to pretty much erode this out pretty extensively. So let me go ahead and just show you what that looks like. So there it is. And if you take a look at the alpha, it's been eroded pretty heavy. So what it is the default 10. I really had to, you know, bring down the darks, bring up the lights a little bit. I eroded very heavily. You can see I'm eroding pretty far to get outside the boundaries of Jack's hairs that are sticking out. And then I just patch black the living daylights out of it and bring it in. So here's my IBK color with all the defaults set up. There's nothing here except I have luminance match on. And if we take a look at the alpha edge, we have these beautiful hairs, which is what we're trying to hold on to. We do have transparency here, but that's where the core mat's going to come in and fix that. So if I come over here and click and drag, you can see these values are below 0.05, and that's legal. So in other words, when we mat this on the back of a back plate image, we're not going to see this noise visible to the human eye when, you know, the scene's moving. We're not going to see some, you know, weird cloud moving around up here. So just be aware of the 0.05 or less is actually acceptable. So don't always think your mat has to be perfectly black and white, especially when you get into gray mats such as windshields and so forth on a car. So IBK Gizmo is looking good. We could push this red weight and in this case blue weight back and forth. I did a little bit of a grade. I commonly do a grade afterwards where I grade the alpha and I grade the white point to 0.98, and you can see the difference here. I'm going to go ahead and slam the gamma down here. And you can see with this grade, if I turn it off and turn it on, just by inching the white point to 0.98, just a hair, you get something that is definitely filling in the holes a little bit more, right? As you can see here, because this area here is going to be tricky because it may not be included in the final solve with our actual core mat. So keep that in mind. And again, you can push this a little bit more. Go to 97, 98. You can see we're starting to creep up on that highlight there. So these highlights are the big problem areas because they're practically white in pixel value, and those can get in your way. So you don't want to get too crazy with this, okay? Because the more you fiddle with the black point and white point, the more you're hardening up at the edge of your mat. So if I take this back here, you can see if I continue to crush the white, we start expanding the mat out too far, right? And again, respectively, the opposite direction, the black point, we start to eat the hair up, right? So this is something that you don't want to touch your fringe mat too much through the process. So now we screen these together, which is a nice compliment, and you can always hit D to disable to see the difference. I always put the core mat in the A input because if I disable it, it defaults to the B. So I can see this is basically without the core mat, with the core mat. What am I losing? Well, I am losing a little bit of this hair detail here. Let's see if I can find it, like this here. See, that's basically being kind of sucked up. Okay, let's take a look over here. This is getting filled in, but we still have a little bit of issues here, right? This stuff might have to require an animated roto or some paint work to recover. Again, I could come over here, maybe do another Keylight to kind of fill in this area, like a localized based key for this. I could show you guys how to do that later, where I would like probably do an offset to this, do a Keylight that's localized to this area, and try to pull a very soft key for just this area and mask it to this area, and that'll kind of maybe collect some of this information here. This is very reminiscent of a time when I was doing a Capital One commercial, and again, you could look it up online. It's called Capital One Tiles, and it is Sam Jackson walking a bunch of moving blocks, and he was wearing very shiny dress shoes, and they were so shiny that we had to literally roto out his shoes. We could not pull a key out of. We tried many different key possibilities, but we could not do it, so we had to physically animate with motion blur, taking into account his actual two shoes being moved. It was a very long shot. It's the longest shot in the commercial, where he's walking and taking a side step, but it's pretty. It was pretty intense, to say the least. And you know, you had to be spot on. You have to be so spot on with this stuff. It's ridiculous. I didn't realize how spot on until you know start to work in the industry. You go, oh my gosh. Okay, so with that, I have this little quality check shuffle here that shows, it basically shuffles the alpha channel to the RGB. This is commonly used for one reason alone, so that while I'm on the RGB channel, I can look at my alpha and I can compare it to the original. You're always going to be going back to the original to see what you lost. You can see in this information, our matte line might be growing a little bit over where it should, right? Let's go ahead and take a look. And you can see here, if I just go back and forth, we filled in this area here. I mean, it's there, but we have this area here that's basically going to be this green patch. So this is where Despill is going to come in, maybe save the day. So it's a reality where you might want to come in here and go, okay, did my IBK work? Don't always commit to an IBK. Okay, I'm just telling you that right now. So you might commit to a Keylight. So if you sit here, you know, people will tell you like, oh, use IBK, use IBK. Well, in this case, it's a static shot. The camera's locked off. The value in this quadrant of this green screen back here is not going to change regardless of jack moving. So if I go ahead and put this into the source, and I come in here and sample, say, this area, again, I want to sample somewhere close to his hair. I'll hold down Shift, Control, and Alt, just so I can resample instead of resampling the sample. And just start fiddling around with the hair. Let's see if we can get something that's decent here. So compare those two. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to compare this to the IBK here. It looks like the IBK is still holding on to a lot. We're getting a good hold out in this area. We're getting a bit of a cloud here, but that still might not be a bad reality. So don't freak out when you do this and you're just like, oh. So again, commonly with the Keylight, you can come in here and I amp the screen gain up just a hair, maybe like 101. You can see how much information we've lost just by doing that, right? If I put this back to 1, see that? So 1.05. Let's go to 1.01 here. There we go. Maybe 1.005. Look at that. I mean, it's pretty intense. The value here, oops. The value here, if I go ahead and click out of this and just sample this area, you can see the value is still below 0.05, so this is acceptable, even though we get this kind of gray cloud up here. And then if that's the case, we can take this, we can take a roto node here, if we wish, and we go ahead. And I'll just do a quick merge, B for background, A for a top. This is good if you're missing any hair details in the specific area here. So I'll take this roto and I'll isolate it out here before we start to get any weird noise. There we go. Okay. And now that we've done that, I'll set this to mask. And don't forget that you want to also blur this. So hit B, blur it, and that'll blur the actual alpha edge. of your roto. There we go. So I'll just go ahead and move this over here. Extend this over. And then I can just add this in if I wish. Usually the grade we'll put as last, right? So I'll just extend that out. And we'll just merge this in. So I'll merge this in, put it as screen, which is the most gentlest way to kind of put stuff in here. There we go. Let's see the difference. You can see we've kind of gained a little bit more information. The key here is, again, maybe getting these little holes that we might want. So a core is probably going to take that away anyway, but you can see we've gained a little bit more hair detail, just a little bit, by the way. But this is a technique you can kind of do if you feel that there's still information missing. Like let's try this area here. And I'm sorry to kind of push, I'm kind of staying on fringe mats when this is a Despill tutorial, but I always get anxious when I do this type of stuff because I kind of look at how can I improve this, how can I make it better, and you got to think of every single scene in here as a painting, you know, so you want to make it look really good. So I'm going to go to this Keylight. Let's go ahead and sample this area. So it's okay to combine, you know, things in here. So if you take a look at A, look, you got some pretty decent detail here. If we take a look at our original gizmo, look at we've kind of lost this information here a little bit. See that? And then this information has been lost just a hair. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of missing there. Again, what's the value of this here? Oops. Keep doing this. Go ahead and click here. You can see the value is, if I put my viewer to it, what is that? It's basically 0.01, right? So we're still good to go. Could still use this. So can we play around with this? Well, in the Keylight, you do have options like I talked about before. You get the screen gain, kind of clean it up a little bit, or you have, you know, let's see a little bit. Let's try some screen mat options here. And nope. So you can do a little bit of this. This is dangerous though, the D spot. But you can see the D spot kind of will do its best to kind of D spot black kind of fill in those holes. But you're getting this sort of weird cluttery look to it here. But if you just kind of be very careful with this, right, you might get away with it. And then of course you got the clip white, which is just the same thing as a grade node set to alpha, and then you're basically crushing the whites with the white value. I can start pulling that back to kind of get that information. Again, I'm going to scan this area. You can see we're still legal, 0.02, right? So up here we might be getting into danger territory. Let's go ahead and see 0.09. Yeah, this is bad news right here because we're above 0.05, but we have this isolate area. So I'm going to do this whole thing again. I'll just copy and paste all these guys and just redefine my roto edge here. And just say, and this might have to be an animated roto. This is the way it is. All right. So as long as we stay away from those areas, you can see, you know, right here, if I take a look and I'll just scan this area here, you can see the values they get pretty close. Maybe I'll bring that in a little bit more. But I've isolated out this area with a nice clean piece. So once again, I'm going to take a merge node with set to screen, just copy paste. And we'll isolate this here. This is keying, folks. If you don't like it, then get out of the kitchen. It is a lot of work. It's not easy. One day when they start to get into, as they're building up the, I think it's the Leica camera, as well as infrared-based keying, this misery will end one day, and we'll all be out of work who are keyers by trade. But for now, it's still heavy. So here is the before and after. You can see we've retained the data right here. So you can spot check these things with Keylight, like I talked about before. And of course, right here might be something you either have to paint or maybe roto. Again, there's all types of little things you can do in here. You can put an animated roto in here throughout the whole process. But again, we're getting a nice key. So let's take a look at the final result with the actual core mat, and let's go back to the original. So I'll set this back to RGB. So here's the original, and here is the mat. So come, walk around your model a little bit. Don't just feel like, I gotta get hurry and get this done. Is your matte expanding out further than it should? In this case, maybe a little bit, but not too much. I'm looking for things like, look at his chin. He's got something going on here. I don't know if that's a reflection, but we did manage to capture that little chunk of flesh or whatever it is. This stuff will look mucky, so get used to it. Let's go over here. That's looking pretty good. A little bit of a sharp fall off right here, so we can maybe play around with that. Could play with the gamma a touch if we feel. Again, we've lost this here, and this whole area is a little overboard here, so something happened here, and I have a feeling it has to do with the way that this gizmo is interpreting the information over here. It's probably based on the sampling information being way over here, and hence we're getting like this sort of ramp up. So one other thing we can do, I'm sorry, I just have this desire to fix keys, so shoot me, is to come in here and maybe do another Keylight. Let's just try Keylight instead of relying on the old tried and true IBK gizmo. I'm put this to source again. And this is talk about isolation here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take this key here, and I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift Control and Alt. I'll hit D to disable this so I can see the color. And let's see if I can kind of click a color that's up here. I'll re-enable it. And it looks like it's still doing the same thing with the Keylight. That's very interesting. So if we take a look at the original plate, yeah, it's very, very interesting. Now, we could come in here with this Keylight and click on the color wheel, hold down Control and click the little color wheel. We can start to adjust the green, see if there's anything changing, like adjust the blue a little bit. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, there you go. You can see what's going on there. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can play with. You can also try to sample the dark tone. It's in the danger zone here. But if I come in over here and try to click, this is dangerous, but let's try to click like a darker tone there. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, it's hit or miss. All right, so whatever. So again, you can keep doing this. You could actually use a key mix to kind of bring that together. So let's just stick with what we got. And we might crush this value a little bit. Maybe it'll kind of resolve the issues. And you can do that, by the way, with a grade that's basically based on a mask. So I can do a grade that's affecting the alpha. And I can do O for roto, and B for blur. Again, I'll put a mask on here, and let's see if we can isolate this area here. And again, I could also maybe drag out with the control button, an extension here. And let's go ahead, blur that up a little bit. And here you can see we could play with the gamma, which is a nice tool. It's not always about just crushing the blacks, you can see, which does help a little bit, but also playing with the gamma a little bit. So there you go. So a little bit cleaner results. Again, sometimes it's not going to be perfect. Let's go ahead and take a look at our final matte. That's looking good. So let's get to the whole point of what this tutorial is, and 23 minutes later here, and talk about Despill. We have our matte, right? We have our matte, we have our core, and we have our fringe matte, right? There's the two. We're going to actually use the core as a mask for the core Despill, and then everything else will be the fringe matte or the edge-based Despill. So let's go ahead and kind of play with these a little bit. So here we start with the basic image here. And the first thing you want to be aware of when you look at these images is, be aware of things such as supersaturated colors, be aware of motion blur, especially when it comes to, again, we're working off of frame 82 here, but you're going to see as we kind of go through this, when we do this key eventually with our Uber key here, that the motion blur is really heavy, and I purposely set up the shutter to be pretty intense, probably too intense in my opinion, to take on a lot of motion blur as he kind of whips his head to the right pretty dramatically. But you can see all types of things. We've got highlights, which are usually issues, reflective materials such as this actual goggles, which will be an issue. And and all types of little fun stuff, especially in this area here, as we kind of deal with Despill. All right, so let's go ahead and, I'm going to play with this expression, so let's go ahead and plug this in. This is the most popular expression tool. Let me go ahead and show you what it does. Ta-da, boom. So you can see what this has done. It has taken out the green via an expression. Now, keep an eye out for highlights. This is where things can get funky with expressions. Again, tampering in God's domain. This can cause issues. You take out green in something that is yellow, you're going to get red or orange, right? So it's just something to be aware of. This does a pretty good job, but you got to keep an eye out these highlights. Again, the Blackmagic has terrible dynamic range, the gradients in between. So the expressions are not always enjoyable, and you can break your color correction when you do this. Now, what you have done when you have taken green out is you've actually taken a piece of the project's essence, in the sense that green had a part to play in this final image's luminance value. So what we need to do is we need to maybe bring that back. So one of the ways you can do that, and again, the expression does a good job of still maintaining the highlights or the luminance information, except in the real heavy hotspots. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to take a merge node, and we're going to do A for here and B for here, and we're going to come in here and choose a minus operation. So here you can see what has been taken out of the image. Okay, and you know, this is it basically. If I hit Y, this is the luminance information that has been lost, and in this case the expression did a good job of not doing too much to it, but the highlights have been hit. As you can see here, this is the heavy area that's been hit. A little bit on the goggles, as you can see. So we can reintroduce that with a merge node right here. And we're going to add a saturation node, and I'm going to take the saturation, bring it down to 0. So if I put that to 0, you can see this is the information, the luminance information, but not without the green hue to it. So if we put this merge node to plus, we are going to merge in that information. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. So even though the background got brighter, just ignore the backing region, which is what's behind Jack. But look at the highlight now. If I go from the original green to the merge node, look that we have not screwed up or broken the color correction on the actual highlights. So you see that? Gotta keep your eye on this sort of stuff. There's a little bit of change, obviously, but in general, it's not as dramatic per se if we, you know, come in here and just look at the expression by itself. You can see we're getting these strange halos around his nose, and up here is a little bit weird. So this information can be used, this kind of saturation value can be used as a mask to color correct the backplate. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute here. So, you know, if you wanted to, you know, let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and merge this to our backplate. So I'm going to take a merge, I'm going to create a constant, and I'm going to take that constant and put its color to something very, very, actually we'll leave it, let's make it slightly crimson red like that. Okay, that's our background plate. So I'll put that B for background. And now for a brief moment, we're going to basically marry together our alpha and RGB. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy node. And the A is the alpha, incoming alpha information. So we're redefining the alpha. And the B is the RGB information. So we're redefining it. Now if we take a look at the copy node, hit A for alpha, we've basically taken the alpha we created, married it to our actual RGB, and now I'm going to pre-mult this. Look at it. And now we've cut it out. Now immediately you look at this and you go, crap, he's got a white outline on him. Oh no, what are we going to do? Well, if we merge that to the background, oh, he's got a halo around him. Now, there's ways of combating this, because the big thing you have to understand, this is a rule book in Hollywood and in industry, is you never change the matte edge in comparison to the original. And the reason being is you can create the keyhole effect where it seems like his hair's getting cut away at, or we're looking through a keyhole, and it gives itself away like some cheesy green screen, weather map type, weather, when you watch the weather on the news. It looks terrible, right? The edges are frizzy, and it looks like they got a haircut with all the little fine follicles that are sticking out. So if I go back to the original, and I look at here, the matte line hasn't changed, thankfully, but the influence of the luminance and the chrominance, or color, it has affected this area here. So there are ways of doing that, and that one of the ways is color correcting the backing region, which is this area right back here. We can actually color correct via this, in this quadrant, the actual color of this green here to match with the best we can what is the actual backplate, which in this case is this red color. Now there are other tools I'm going to show you where you can use Despill to drive both negative and positive values to create darker and brighter areas based on the actual backplate image itself, whether it's a sunset or anything like that, to really blend the character in. But one of the methods you can do is just changing the backing color correcting the backing region. So if this is the circumstance where we're trying to match it to this crimson dark, red background, if I hit the letter Y, you can see the chrominance or the luminance is very dark, right? If I come back to here, the backing region is very bright. So that's one problem. The other problem we have is the backing region is desaturated. There is no color back there because we did a despill, whereas this color is very red, right? So with that in mind, we can do a couple of things to kind of color correct the backing region. One little trick I do, and again, the more manipulation you do to your image, the more you're fiddling in God's domain, and by doing so, you're going to have all types of possible artifacts. Your audiences might pick up on it and go, that doesn't look right. So I'm going to do a grade node. Remember, we're color correcting red, green, blue information only. And I'm going to take the outputting information of this as a mask to color correct this area here. And be aware, this is not a black and white mask. The color here, over here, is like 0.2, So it's going to have a very low amount of influence. We could color grade this, but it'll actually give us problems. So I'm going to go ahead and daisy chain this. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in, this is a mask. I'm going to change the mask to the incoming mask input of RGB red, because if you look at this saturation node, R, G, and B are exactly the same. So I only need one of those. So if I go to this grade node now, you can see I can take the gain and start to bring down the luminance there. I haven't played with the color yet, so if I wanted to, I can come into the gain, right, and maybe, put some red in there or something like that, right, just a little bit. Just a little bit of maybe 0.6. And I can daisy chain this through this process. So I can copy paste the grade node. You can see we're getting darker. And create another one. We're slowly bringing this value closer and closer to our backing region color that we're intended to put this on. I remember working as a compositor with my good friend Brad, who's worked on a bazillion feature films. He's worked at every post house known to man. He taught me a ton. And the guy was like saying, you know what, because we were all worried about the key and all that, or the background. He's like, you know what, we got to wait till we know what we're putting him behind. It all depends on what the backing is going to be, or what we're putting behind the actor. That'll determine the luminance that we have to kind of achieve. Now I'm going to show you this process, and you're going to see how it sort of breaks to a certain degree. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pull this one in. Here we go. And now we've kind of matched pretty close to this red. Not crazy. I can continue to take this grade, and again, I could keep going and I can take this grade node, and again, I'll just do one more here so you can see why I'm doing this. I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So keep going. So now we're finally getting close to this color. Let's see how it looks now. Still not there yet, right? But if I were to disable all these grade nodes, look how much more obvious this is, right? It's like, oh my gosh, right? Now you can see what's going on here. The hairs are turning yellow, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm just showing this because this is an example of sort of cheating to a certain degree. Because you can try to do this or key the background or something, and it's just not going to work. So I'm going to show you another method here. using the Keylight, which is an awesome, awesome tool. So kind of come over here really quick. And if we take a look at the Keylight, pull that guy in. If you create a default Keylight, let me just go ahead and erase this one. Create a default Keylight. It has a screen color set to 000, so let me go ahead and put the input in. And what I can do is immediately just put 1 in the value of the second one here. And that does, you guessed it, a Despill on the green. Now once again, we have lost luminance information. Let's look at the difference between this and the expression, by the way. Very similar, right? Almost close to almost exactly the same, actually. See that? It does basically the same thing, but here's the cool thing about the Keylight, though. This is really neat. Is the Keylight allows you to change the backing region color by adjusting the screen color. Now remember, we are getting a key out of this, right? But we don't care about the key. We're just whatever, right? This is all about the sort of pre-built inside Keylight default. Every time you do a key with Keylight, it actually does its own basic Despill. So it has Despill options in here. In this case, you can see the alpha bias and the Despill bias. So let's go ahead, and again, we're not worried about pulling a key. We're really just about trying to play with this background. So if I take this screen color, I can put a value in here to like 0.01, and I'll come to my blue, put a value of 0.01. Now check this out. This is really cool. I can go ahead and start filling with this. I'll start to bring down the color here. Bring that down. You can see it's starting to push towards blue, but if I come over here to the blue, and let's see, we'll start bringing that down. I'll bring this back up. You can see that we can start to manipulate the image, right, to match with the background. You can see if I kind of fiddle with this, I can start to get a color. Now the question is, how is this affecting the skin tones? This is the danger zone. You start pulling this stunt, you can have a problem. But the good news is, the really good news is we're going to only be using this as an edge matte. This is all about worried about the edges, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at it. So here you can see we're getting pretty heavy dark result here, right? You see the difference in luminance between one side to the other. So I can kind of look at this and then judge back to, let's go ahead and plug in this to our copy node. So I'll just plug this in like here. And let's start to play a little bit. So I'm going to put my merge node here. And look at that. Now we're getting darker edges over here because it's getting the actual Despill is actually darkening it. But we're getting a pretty amazing result right here. And if we want to, again, we can compare the two. In fact, I'll just grab this expression really quick, and I'll put it right here. And let's just do a quick switch node, which helps us do a comparison. So I'll put this to switch to 0 to 1, so you can see the difference here. Gotta move this over here. And I'm going to switch between the expression and here. So you can see the halo. Let's go ahead and take a look. See the halo, especially over here. It's big time over here. Big time. So what you can commonly do in the whole process is, I'll switch back here. Obviously we went overboard with the Keylight. So what I can do is I'll put my viewer to the Keylight, and then I'll hit 1. I'm going to hit number 1 alphanumeric keyboard on the Keylight. I'm going to put number 2 to this final merge. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a wipe, like you can see here. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of put a comparison like that, right? So now you can see what's going on. So now I can come in here, see the finished product versus, you know, what's what. So I'm going to start playing around with this a little bit more. Pull this back. See if we can kind of bring this back a little bit. There we go. So we still have a little bit of a dark black edge, as you can see. Again, this is the Despill. This is the final result. But it doesn't look too bad, right? We don't have those heavy black edges anymore. We can keep fiddling with this by increasing the luminance value. See how that's starting to match? This is starting to match with this. So you can start to fiddle with this. Fiddle with this. Be aware as you're doing this, though, we're losing a little bit of the green here. You see that? So you can only do so much of this before something starts adjusting the green itself. You can't overcrank the green here. Okay, the green is green. So I can start to pull the green back. You know, not the best. So you want to put this at 1. So this is, again, like talk about, you know, tampering in God's domain. Right? I'm going to take this blue and try to bring it back. And then I'll drag this in. I want to get these values basically back to 0. Maybe have a bright red. Okay. So a little bit of play, and again, if you get too dramatic of different values here, you can create all types of issues here. But it's actually holding up pretty good. We still have this kind of green area here, which we can kind of color correct with a hue correct. But you can see it's looking pretty good. It's not looking that great over here, right? It's something going on. So what can we do to fix that? Well, what we could do is I'll turn off my merge here. Let's go back to our Keylight. Is we can actually take this and make a copy of it, and we'll do a key mix. Let's go ahead and do a key mix here. B and A. Plug in the same one. Plug in this to the information here. Hit O for roto. And I'm going to go ahead and do a color correction that's different for this side. Okay, so this is basically exposing the A side, right, and combining them together. So if I make an adjustment here to this Keylight, let's go ahead and do that. So you can see this side staying put, and now we're adjusting the color to this side. So now our backing region actually matches this. Now in the process of doing this, you have to take a look at your key mix. Go back to the original. Have you played with the skin tones? Yes, we've done a lot of nasty work here, but we're going to put a core matte of a Despill in the center here. So really we're only worried about the outer edges. So right here, obviously, here's where we're bumping into problems. This stuff is getting a little bit too crunchy. We're getting black edges. So you can only do so much, and this is where edge extending and using this very interesting Despill edge blending technique will help solve the problem. But if we come back all the way to our merge now you can see, despite the artifacts that we've created here, which we can kind of fiddle with, play with a little bit, you can see the difference. So again, I'm going to come over here and do the switch back and forth. Night and day, you see that? It's not perfect, but it's taking care of a lot of the issues. Now, you're not always going to get a perfectly uniform color in your backplate, right? You might have a sunset where it's a bright sun here and a bluish horizon over here. So again, I'm going to show you techniques in the future how you can get away with this. But these are techniques you can do your best to sort of blend to whatever you want. You can also try to use the color of his hair. So for instance, if I come in here, here's the Keylight, right? And he's got a this is dark. Like his hair is so dark, it's like black. So if you had like a very bright brown here, this would be a little bit easier to do. So if I go back to this Keylight, in this case, all we have is a darkness in this area, right? On this edge. So again, I can go ahead and darken this to try to match his hair, but you can see what's happening here. We are basically getting hair that is so dark, it's dark, right? See if we can kind of do our best to match the hair color. Yeah, so it's hit or miss when you get into dark values, I hate to say. But even this brown color here, let's kind of play around a little bit. You gotta like get used to it. There we go. So now we're getting a brown color for the hair, right? Now I'm darkening it up a little bit. And you might think like, oh, that, doesn't matter. Well, it does matter big time in luminance information. You can see if I take a look at the original versus the Keylight and hit the letter Y. See the bright value difference? Now we are getting some black edges here, but you can kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and look at it now. Again, dark edges, we can probably dial back a little bit here. In this case, if we take a look at our Keylight, you can see we have a pretty heavy value here, say the red. So, and again, sometimes you can just look at it. Let's see if we can kind of, basically it needs to be darker. Let's take a look here. Yeah, so, yeah, it's not doing the greatest. That's about as close as we can get, but you can see we're introducing a sort of a granular pattern there. And we're also introducing a red. Again, any manipulation is just going to be a nightmare in here. But if you can come close to bringing the luminance value and the chrominance value very close to the hair, you can come over here now, and you can see that's done a world of difference. Now again, this is not the best way of doing this. So let's go ahead and move on to the hue correct. So even in the midst of doing all this work, right, I can come in here and say, well, because we've been playing with the red and blue information, we've reintroduced some green here, right? So I can go ahead and jump over to my hue correct, and you can see the hue correct has taken out the green completely. So the hue correct is currently set up so that the green suppression has basically brought down this values of green in the brownish tones. So I can hold down Shift and Control and sample this area, and you can see the line is telling me this is where the color's at that needs to be taken out. But if I get, this is the skin tone area, which is a danger zone, so you usually don't want to fiddle with that, because you can see if I take this hue correct, watch what happens. I'm taking green out, hence I'm losing the nice orangey, yellow orangey color, right? And it's becoming more, magenta pink, right? The highlights, that's bad. So commonly with the hue correct in regards to this, it's usually accompanied by a mask. So I'm going to go ahead and create another rotomatte. Obviously blur it. And I'm just going to isolate this area here. And again, I'm going to really blur this baby up, so we'll go like maybe 200. So now you can see we've taken out this green area, but we've maintained this nice golden orange reality over here. So this can be something that usually has to be tracked or very carefully animated so you don't see a swimming edge moving back and forth for the character. But spot checking is usually all together. Now hue correct can be used by itself alone, but it can start to fiddle with everything universally. So usually masks are accompanied with the hue correct node. And then of course we have kill spill. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you that really quick. So I can go ahead and just come bring this over here, and we'll plug the image in. Alright, so take a look at kill spill. So kill spill is very interesting. Is a rather interesting plugin in the sense that you have what's called suppression. You can hover over these and see what it says, biasing the mix of the channels used to cap the spill channel. For example, 0 equals green channel is capped by the red channel, 0.5 green channel is capped by half mix of red and blue, and 1 is green channel is capped by the blue channel. So it's sort of a mix between the red and the blue. The limiter is sort of like an aggression as far as the amount of actual spill suppression. So you can see you get to a point right here, you can put it all the way up to 10 or whatever. And let's just kind of look at the difference here. You can see pull it all the way up. And we take a look at it, disable, re-enable. Let's go ahead and kind of fiddle with it a little bit. There's a lot of fiddling that goes on with this. It's kind of hard to explain the settings of it. So if we take a look here, we can see the green. Let's add some suppression here. And you can see the limiter. You can see as we start to pull this back, we start to get that black and white background. And then the suppression, you got to be careful with this. And then Spill Tweak actually changes the luminance. So here you can come in and actually change the background color luminance, which we talked about was pretty cool. We did that in the Keylight, but in this case we can actually come in here and start fiddling with this backplate image. So I can actually come in here, you can come in here and bring this down, right, and try to, in our best efforts, try to match that crimson red. Again, you're not going to get the best results here. As you can see, you can only go so far with it, right? So, you can see luminance, you can bring it really down if you want, but that's about as far as you're going to get in the midst of that. So you can see in comparison to the Keylight, right, a little bit of difference. We're losing some information here in regards to the green being too much. So that's where we can go back to the suppression amount here and back it off so we maintain that highlight. We don't want to lose the golden oranges like we talked about. So Kill Spill's great, and then of course we have the wonderful Despill Madness. There's many tutorials online how to use Despill Madness. This one is a big industry. People love this guy for some reason. You can see it's a little bit easier on the edges in regards to the suppression here. And again, you can adjust this color to do your best to kind of match in, so like a brownish hair color here. But again, getting it darker is a trickier, it's very tricky. You can see like right here, because the luminance is still to a certain degree there. You do have this limiter. Again, we can kind of come back in here and fiddle with this a little bit. So again, there's this big difference here between core Despill and edge Despill. And we're going to cover that in the next lesson as we kind of move on.